A pencil. Remember when you were in school and you used a pencil and you got that point really sharp and you would use the eraser and all the crumbles would go everywhere, and you looked around the room and everyone else had a pencil too? How reassuring that must have been. Something as simple as a pencil that made you fit in, that made you feel like you were part of the same group. And what about the notebooks? And you opened up the notebook and you wrote in it with your pencil, and you looked around the room and everyone else was doing the same. Something so simple that made you feel like you belonged. You were the same as everyone else. But I want you to think for just a minute. What if you were blind? The pencil would be meaningless, and so would the notebook. My name is Amy Downard, and I'm a teacher for the blind and visually impaired for Honolulu District. I've had the pleasure of working with students here for over 22 years. And I just wanted you to think again about being that student again, and that you were blind. You want to see your pencil? Oh, here it is. I am not kidding. This is a Braille writer, and this is one of the first things that we would teach any student how to use. It has keys in it, and when I press the keys, like capital sign, and letter A, and a M, and a Y, it makes Braille at the top here that I can feel. But going back to being that student, and you're in your class, and you're doing your work, and you stop, and you listen. Is anyone else using a Braille writer? I don't hear one. No. And think about it. If you were blind and a student, you wouldn't hear that sound in your class. And if you used a cane for the blind, walking around and tapping on the ground, and you stopped for a minute, you wouldn't hear that either. If you were a student who was blind, you wouldn't hear those sounds in your classroom. As you walk down the hallway, you wouldn't even hear them in any other classroom. In Hawaii, we don't have a school for the blind or a special program for the blind where students come, like a resource or a magnet school. They go to the schools that all the other kids would normally go to, and teachers like me, special ed teachers for the blind, come to them. It's called itinerant. And it's a good program. You know, we get to the students and they can go to schools in their own neighborhoods. But that student, when they're at their school, in their classroom, as they walk all through the class, all through the school, they don't hear those sounds of a Braille writer or a cane. Because usually they're the only student in that classroom who's blind. They're the only student in the entire school who is blind. They go home and they don't hear those sounds either, because there's no one in their family many times who is also blind. There's no one down the street as they walk in the neighborhood who is blind. In Honolulu, we have over 150,000 students, and of those students, less than 70 receive services because of significant vision loss, because of blindness. How isolating and alone these kids feel. So when I became a teacher here, I heard about peer interactions. And peer interactions is when the teachers, the itinerant teachers in our state, pull these kids together, because we know that they need to know that they're not the only one who's blind. And I want to share that story with you today. The successes that I've seen, the social, emotional needs are met for self-awareness, for self-acceptance for our students who are blind and visually impaired. I was with a student on one of these peer interactions, and we went to the program for the blind, the adult program for the blind in Honolulu, Ho'opono. And this little 4-year-old with his little cane, or 5-year-old, he was in kindergarten, and we were walking around with a group of maybe 9 or 10 students, all elementary age. And we go into the courtyard and we hear the tapping of a cane. And one of the teachers came up to talk to our group on our visit. And that student said, "Are you blind?" And the man said, "Yes." He goes, "You are?" He was shocked. "Someone else is blind besides me?" And then he heard another cane, and another person came, an adult client who was getting services at that time at the center. And he asked that person, "Are you blind?" And he said, "Yeah." He goes, "You are?" He just couldn't believe it. And cane after cane after cane, people were coming up to say hi to the kids. And he was just amazed. "You're blind and you're blind?" And then one of the counselors came in, and he had a wonderful, large, booming voice. And he asked him, "Are you blind?" And he said no. And he goes, "You're not? Like, what's wrong with you, buddy? Everybody else here is blind. What's wrong with you?" He had never been in a place with so many blind people who were just like him. What an impact that had to be for him. I had an 8th grader I worked with, and this kid, I told him in 8th grade, "You are smarter now than I will ever be." He was what a brilliant mind. So I'm teaching him appropriate skills at 8th grade. You should be able to take the city bus home. And so we worked on that skill with the cane. And we went out during the school day with lighter traffic, not all the students around, to practice this skill. So when he was ready, I didn't ask him a question that I should have. I should have asked him, "How do you feel about using your cane in front of your friends when you're going to the bus stop?" I just assumed. I'd worked with this kid for 3 years. He had never ever seemed like he was ashamed of using any of his materials. As we got ready to cross the street and all of the students were coming out and heading to the bus stop, we began to cross the street. And don't you know, as he was crossing the street, he put his cane behind his back to try to hide it. I was like, what are you doing? And then we got across the street and we talked a little bit, but I was really shocked. I had no idea how that was going to impact him. The last part of my story is my favorite part. And that happened a couple of years ago. It was a 16-year-old student I'd been working with for years, and he had vision when he was younger, but at this time at 16, he was almost totally blind. And we had a peer interaction where we got our students together around the holidays, right before winter break. And we were doing activities like wrapping presents and making popcorn treats and learning how to do playlists on YouTube. And also just a group talk. We never tell the kids exactly what to say, but the older kids, we were like, go talk to these kids. Tell them, just start some conversation. But don't you know, he got in front of those kids. There was about 13 to 14 students, 6th grade to 12th grade. And he said to them, "Hi, I'm blind, and I love being blind because that's who I am." People, when I tell them I'm blind or they can see that I'm blind, they go, "Oh, you poor thing. Oh, I'm so sorry." And I'm thinking, he said, "Well, why should you be sorry? It's not a bad thing that I'm blind. It's not a sad thing that I'm blind. I'm just blind. I love being blind because that's who I am." Can you imagine? 16 years old, to have that much self-confidence, that much self-acceptance was amazing to me. I was speechless. I still get chills just thinking about that. And here's what I really want to tell you. I know for sure, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the kids he was talking to, they had never, ever heard anyone in their entire life tell them that you should love being blind. How powerful. I'm sure those words stayed with them to this day, and hopefully longer. But that power, that peer interaction, that addressing the social and emotional needs of this group of kids who feel so isolated every second of every day, using tools that are so different from everyone else. They are my heroes. I am so proud to be their teacher. So that's the story I wanted to share with you today. The power of peer interaction. We don't have to do any, we could go swimming, we can go bowling. The activity does not matter. It's just bringing these kids together to know that they're not the only one who's blind. And it's okay to be blind, and you should love it because that's who you are. Thank you so much for joining me for my story today. I'm sure I have lots more to come. Mahalo.